Welcome back. I am going to discuss Battle Brothers tips again. So last time I kind of talked about just my advice for how to make this game more enjoyable if you're not a hardcore player, because it is quite brutal. Basic recommendations for how to make money, kind of different mechanics with how the cities work, how the retinue works, ways that you should go out and clear strongholds, how to get famed weapons. Talked a little bit about rating and the ambitions. Kind of the basic core mechanics of the game. So during this episode here for my tip section, I talked about how you hired different brothers and things like that, but I wanted to go into a little bit about different characters themselves here. So, my guys are all end game here. They're really not that good. There's a few that are quite good, but for the most part they're not. So let's kind of compare here. When you hire a character, you don't know what kind of traits they're going to get. So if you look here, you get kind of just a generic background. They kind of give you a little talk. This is the main character, so when you start the tutorial, you get, I want to say 3, I think is what it was, right? Did one of my guys die? No, here we go. So you get these 3 main characters, and I don't know if their stars are always in the same location or not, but it gives you like a little basic background stuff. So you have a background companion, pit fighter. You just get that when you end up fighting in the arena. I don't think it actually does anything for you. So his trait is that he's loyal, so he's unlikely to leave you even if you run out of crowns or provisions. You'll hire somebody, they're almost always going to be content. The happier they are, the more battles they win, the more cities you go to, good experience happen, the more content they are. When the happier they are, the more buffs they get, and when they're unhappy, then they suffer penalties. And then if they get really unhappy, then they may actually leave your party. Once a character gets killed in combat, meaning they go down to 0 HP, there's kind of 2 things that can end up happening. Is one, they just flat out die, and there's permadeath in this game. There's no like resurrection or anything like that, or they can end up suffering a permanent injury. So that's what this icon is indicating here. So his nose is cut off. So if I actually took off his helmet, you'd see his nose has literally been cut off. So, well, I think originally when I started playing this game, I think these model characters are quite dorky looking, but they're actually surprisingly informative. Each one will change their look with the equipment. If they suffer permanent injuries, you'll see it. When they die, it'll sometimes be quite graphic. They'll be decapitated, for example. You can see if the shields are being broken, they'll start cracking. You can see if the equipment's been killed. When you're looking at the enemies, you can tell what kind of weapons and armor and shields and things that they have by the models that you can see. If they have a famed weapon, they'll actually be carrying the famed weapon, and they'll look like a different icon. So over time, it kind of grew on me. I do think it's still kind of dorky, kind of looks like little chess pieces moving around there, but it's important for you to know kind of what's going on there. So while the generic views think, oh well, let's see here. So this is like an oath taker. This is one of the higher tier units here, or a hunter, which I think are the best ranged units. And they're usually not too expensive, so you can get some excellent archers by hiring the hunters. Here's a butcher. Again, the guys I took, I just tried to keep throughout the whole game. And this one's actually particularly good. So you can find low background units here that can be quite helpful early on or throughout the game, but for the most part you'll want your early characters to die or get fired and hire guys that have better roles. But not all traits are helpful. Like this one's arena fire, so he's got +5 resolve. He's a team player, so he's got a 50% lower chance to hit inflict friendly fire, so if he's an archer, that would be quite beneficial. I think this also triggers like an event, so you trigger events not only with your background, but with their traits can affect it as well. But not all these traits are going to be positive, like ailing. So if he gets poisoned, it's going to last an additional turn. And then this guy has some permanent injuries too, as you can see. So he's got low vision, so you can get multiple permanent injuries stacked on a single guy here. So eventually, if you get enough permanent injuries and they just haven't died, you probably want to just get rid of them because they're going to be so handicapped. But you can, when you hire guys, they can have both positive and negative traits, or they may have no traits at all. So that's the first thing you got to realize when you're hiring somebody, is you'll want to be looking through here. Make sure that they don't have something that's going to completely wreck you. The next thing you're going to want to be doing is looking at their actual attributes here. So there's several attributes in this game. First one's HP, or hit points. So if that's how much they could take hits, you'll want your guys to have, you know, every guy you'd like to have around 50 to 60 HP, I would say. If they're depending on certain roles, you may want them to have more than that. But I mean, really 50, 60 to 80, I would say. You certainly don't need to feel like you have to put a bunch of points into HP though, unless you're going to create some sort of tank or a nimble fighter. Because what they're going to do to survive is you're going to be giving them armor, and in this game you have two different kinds. You have head armor and you have body armor, and it typically, unless they have a weapon that's going to hit through armor and still carry, even a little bit of HP here with my archers. I mean, the archers almost never died in my campaign, unless the AI got through my front lines and started attacking them. Because even if they got attacked, you know, I'd have a couple turns usually, unless there was like some boss that was coming after them to try to save them. And by taking a couple hits to my armor, it just wouldn't get the HP here being lower. Just wasn't a big deal. So like I said, unless you're doing a specific build where you need to have a lot of HP, it's not a huge deal. Now, if you're talking, some guys have like 30, 40 HP, that's a big deal, because if you get a minor bleed and you don't have bandages to be able to heal, those guys are likely going to die. So that it could be a liability if it's too low. But as long as you have a decent amount, you can get that. And now you may say, oh, I only got, you know, 40 HP to start with. There's an ability called Classiest, which just automatically boosts the HP by 25%. So remember that you have that ability as well. So it may be worthwhile to just put a single skill point into Classiest, and then you may not have to put any points into your hit points. But that's kind of the basics for the hit points here. Action points, there's really no way that you're going to change that unless you get Berserk, which will refund you 4 action points on a kill. Everybody's going to have 9 action points from level 1 all the way to max level. A huge ability, important trait is fatigue. If your character has low fatigue, they're going to be a bad character. Any kind of armor that you put on is going to lower fatigue. So as you can see, this lowers it by 27. This helm lowers it by 17. Carrying this heavy weapon lowers it by 10. So you can already see, let's just round up to 30, let's say 30, 20. So that's like a little short of 50. So let's say 55 for an estimate for just carrying this stuff. And then, you know, he's got this, which is another 6 fatigue. So then you have to do regular attacks, and every regular attack here is 12 additional fatigue, and you can attack twice with this kind of weapon, so that's 24 fatigue. So if you're the important thing is, if you just got to be very careful how you want to do the fatigue, because you got to decide how you want to do this. If you want to get a unit that's going to be carrying a lot of this armor, then you're going to want to put points into fatigue, or else they're just going to every 2 attacks they're going to need to recover, and then you're just wasting turns recovering. So while you think, oh, I got to put a bunch of stuff into HP, no, the much more important is everybody's going to benefit from fatigue. So I think this is one of the most important traits to put points into, especially if you're going to give them Berserk, where you're going to start doing multiple attacks per turn, or you're going to give a weapon that allows you to do a lot of attacks per turn. You can still use a unit that has poor fatigue, but you're probably only going to be able to give them medium armor, and you're probably going to want to give them, you know, a heavy weapon like a 2-handed mace that's only going to have 1 attack per turn. So you can then recover, because after every turn you'll heal some fatigue back. but if you do that, you'll stop it from maxing out. And if they have poor fatigue, it makes no sense for you to put Berserk on them, because you're just going to be capping out their fatigue, and then you get 2 attacks here, but then the next turn you're going to have to use something like Recover to get those abilities back. It's like, well, you just wasted your turn. Why do you even waste your points on this Berserk here? So just keep that in mind, and if you can get guys that have a lot of stars and fatigue, they're going to be good brothers, unless the rest of their rolls are bad, and it'll give you a lot of avenues to do a lot of good things, the more stars that there are in fatigue. So I'd strongly recommend that you keep an eye on that. Morale in this game, it's affected by resolve, but morale is just something that you're going to see in the game. So if you start getting a bunch of injuries, so if you kill an enemy, it's gonna increase morale. If they see an enemy getting killed, it's going to go up. However, if you see an ally getting killed, it's going to lower it. If they see an ally flee, it's going to cause a mass rout. If your guys end up getting hit for more than 15 points of damage, that can cause a morale check. So all those things, the lower it drops, it'll start debuffing your character, and they'll suffer penalties. And if they end up fleeing, then they'll try to run away. And if you're next to enemy unit when they're retreating, it'll trigger attack of opportunity, and they can get themselves killed for sure. And it can take several turns for them to stop fleeing, and they'll just randomly run all around the map, and you can't control where they go. So it can be a huge liability when that happens. So you do want to have some points in resolve. That will help you. That's like your willpower and bravery. So if somebody has really low resolve, then they can definitely be in trouble. I found that having a basic resolve kind of in the upper 40s to 60s was quite strong. I was pretty happy with guys that had resolve in the 50s, to 60s. But like this guy in the 30s, he was frequently starting to freak out and starting to waver, and he was kind of a liability. Or there's other characters, like if you're going to make them a tank, and especially if you're going to use them to be a solo tank and give them Lone Wolf, which is an ability that makes them stronger when they're by themselves, you're going to need those guys to have more resolve to be able to do good things for you. Otherwise, they're going to break and get surrounded and suffer bad issues. So resolve, you probably aren't going to have to put a bunch of points into it unless you want to make a banner guy, which is why this guy has 145. But typically, 40s to 60s will be no issue. And if you can, because what happens, you give a banner, he gives 10% of his resolve to everybody within 4 squares of him, so that raises it by another 14 points if this guy was your banner, or 14.5. So that all of a sudden brings him up to a higher resolve. So that's why you don't need to put a bunch of points into resolve, but if it's low, it'll be a liability, and he'll get your guys killed. So just be aware of that. Initiative. I found that initiative is by far the least important trait in this game. I tried to create like a Nimble build with high initiative. I wasted a bunch of points putting that in there, and I didn't think it made a huge difference. You're either going to be fighting enemies that are going to be going really fast, in which case they'll slam into you, and then you'll get to attack them, and you don't need to waste time moving, because with the weapons that you get 2 attacks if you move and then get in there, and attack them, you're only going to have 1 attack, but if they're right next to you, you'll have 2. So for me, initiative had really minimal role for me. There's very few times where somebody had a higher initiative and it made a big difference. Typically your archers are going to just naturally have higher initiative, and they're going to be in lower tier armor. I like to put all my guys in heavy armor, so they all had shit initiative anyways, and they could all take a hit because they have special abilities that I'll talk about that allow them to take big hits. So for me, initiative, I couldn't care if it was high, if it was low, fuck it. It made no difference for me. So kind of my priority would be fatigue, plus or minus HP. Hopefully you'll just have a guy that rolled high enough on resolve that you wanted to put points into it. But I don't think I increased anybody's resolve except for my banner guy. A huge skill in this one is melee skill. So this is one, especially if you want to get a guy later tier, like let's see here. So this is a guy that I turned out to be a tank. I built him wrong, but he only got to 62, and he's a level 17. Here's a guy that's level 17 and he's 97, so he's got over 30% chance, and he would land attacks left and right. This guy would miss attacks all the time. This guy is level 1 and he's already started at 50, and this guy is 17 levels higher, and he's barely higher. This guy will way overpass him in terms of his melee hit chances. So this character will be actually a really good brother later on, whereas this one is not so good. Now the thing that's gonna suck with this guy is his resolve is really low, so that might cause us issues, especially because he's a pessimist. So that causes him to be a liability for the team. But for these other traits, I thought it was worth doing. But this guy may be kind of shitty, where this guy is going to be a great melee frontliner. So keep into, if you're going to have somebody be a melee fighter, you're going to want to increase their melee skills. The only time that I really wouldn't want to increase it, obviously, is archers. Archers will have no interest in putting skills in the melee, because hopefully they're never going to be in melee combat. And if they do, they have a weapon on there, it's purely for defense. But I like to give them abilities to get them out of melee combat anyways. So a guy is going to be a frontliner or be swinging a sword around or even a two-handed weapon, you're going to always want to dump points into melee, and you're going to want to have as many stars in here. Maybe I should talk about how the stars work, because I didn't really discuss that. So guys will randomly have stars on different abilities. So on this one, it's on his melee skill, his defensive skill, and his resolve. So when the guys level for the first 10 levels that they have, they'll randomly get points into each one of these things. So let's see here. Of course, I don't have somebody that's ready to level. Dang it. But they'll just randomly roll for traits. So it could be like +1, +5, +3, you know, something like that. And then what the stars do is I think it just adds a number of those points. So like if this one rolled a 1, I think it would be a 4. Or it makes it so the minimum maybe is like a 3. I'm not quite sure how it works, but anyways, it has a huge effect by the end of the game on how many points you get there, because once they get over 10, you just get to be 1 points for every trait. So you just click, 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 and you can only click on 3 things. So you have 3 skills that you can increase every level for random rolls, and the more stars that are in there, 3 being the highest, it'll significantly increase your risk of having better rolls, and it can give you huge changes in your outcomes. So for example, I think my archers, this guy has 104 range, and he has 106 fatigue, and he's fully kitted out. He gets to have tons of attacks, whereas this guy, who is supposed to be one of my strongest characters, you know, he only has 98, but he has 2 stars, which is still very high, but his fatigue is quite a bit lower. So he will be able to attack, you know, he'll have, by doing several attacks here, he's going to have to use recover, whereas this guy maybe has to use it once per combat. This guy will probably use it 2 or 3 times. I guess all my archers are fantastic, but I had one of the guys that died was a lower tier archer, and he was like in the 80s. So you know, these guys would hit almost every shot, whereas he would be missing attacks randomly. So it makes a huge difference. I would say the lowest you would want a melee on a character that's actually going to be swinging is probably in the 60s. And even then, they're missing probably at least a third of their attacks, and if not a little bit more, especially when they're fighting higher tier guys. Whereas these ones, you know, you can count on them hitting pretty regularly, which is even more important when you're trying to have them use weapons like this that have AoE attacks, because they automatically suffer a penalty to, you know, hit chances just as a straight up percentage. Because what it does is it takes your melee skill minus your enemy's melee defense, which reduces the attack with their evasion and any other abilities that they have, minus the abilities penalty to hit, or if you're using certain weapons like a two-handed weapon that has range, if they're right next to you, then they suffer additional penalties. And I think your fatigue and then your happiness, everything kind of builds on itself at what your hit chances are. So by having this as high as it can go, that'll be beneficial for you. So likewise, if you're going to have a melee guy, it doesn't significantly matter what their range skill is, except that it kind of does. And the one time that it would kind of matter if it does is if you're going to have these guys use throwing weapons, because that's how you can turn a character that's kind of crappy into somebody that can actually have some utility. And typically if you want to do that, you'll want to have their rolls be 40s to 50s. And like this guy, I didn't put any points into it, but he already had 42. So had he been somebody that I wasn't going to be a good melee fighter, which he was, so I wouldn't have done this on him anyways, but I would have given him the quick hands and throwing weapons, and he would have been able to use throwing weapons and then switch into his melee weapon and do a ton of damage. So that's kind of how that works. So for the archers, you're never going to be like, oh, this guy rolled exceptionally well for his ranged attacks but shitty for his melee, I'm going to can him. Whereas you may do something like that depending on what the situation is with the melee, where it's like he rolled so-so with the melee, but he's got also a so-so range. He can be a throwing guy and may have some utility. Whereas if he rolls absolutely abysmally for his melee attack or your ranged attack, you're just going to can those guys straight out. So that's a way that you may get some more utility here. Again, for the archers, obviously you want to dump as many points as you can in there because it'll increase your chances of hitting. And you know, this is a game where you need to be playing offensively. Rarely does it make sense for you to be defensive unless you're kiting guys around. By attacking, doing damage, you're going to kill units. You're going to cause morale checks for your enemies and make them flee, and it's going to save your guys, which will allow you to save money on not having to repair, and you'll get experience, and because you want to get guys leveled as fast as possible, because going from a level 1 to a level 2 to a level 3 has huge significant bonuses to survivability and just how effective units are. Like you cannot underestimate how significant a level up is in this game. It's quite amazing, especially when it's, you know, you only have 10 levels where it makes huge differences, and then it kind of caps out where you're just getting 1 skill point to put into 3 attributes every level. And as you can tell, you know, 64,000 to level up compared to 200, so you can rapidly get on there. Oh, sorry, it's for the first 11 levels, then they no longer gain those abilities. The next ability, so it's kind of the same thing with the ranged. The next important ability, and almost everybody's going to want to have some melee defense, but even more so for your melee character. So this guy only has 25. That's not very good. So this guy gets smacked around all the fucking time and takes a bunch of hits. He gets nearly taken out, whereas this guy also, you know, I didn't build him very well. He was actually a hunter that rolled exceptionally well, but then he has no melee defense, so he actually turned out to be okay because he has got a decent amount of fatigue, so I put really heavy gear on him. But this guy gets hit all the time, and there were several missions where I would have to restart because he get himself killed because he just can't take a hit, compared to, you know, here's somebody that actually rolled pretty well, so he's in the 40s. This guy's 43. So, you know, he can actually get attacked and he can dodge, and, you know, it works out pretty well here. Whereas the enemies are almost always hitting these guys. So really what you'd like to do is have your melee defense be as high as possible. For kind of a standard, just kind of damage dealer, what I do is I put points into melee attack, melee defense, and fatigue. Those would be the 3 things I put it in. I wouldn't put a lot of points into HP unless he was exceptionally low. I'd put points into Colossus, and then that'll allow him to be a good battle brother. Hopefully the resolve will be okay if you've rolled good enough. If you get like a 4 or a 5 into ranged defense, I would put skills into ranged defense as well. But what I've rapidly found is once you get above, you know, 20 to 30 ranged defense, I didn't find that it made much of a difference anymore. So I wasted a bunch of experience points, attribute points, putting it into ranged defense, because if you put them in heavy armor, they're typically already getting reduced damage from range, and they're able to dodge fairly regularly. Now, if it was exceptionally low range defense, what will happen is all the archers in the game will then focus fire down on that character and kill him. So you obviously don't want that to be the situation, especially if they're in the front line where they're going to be soaking up archer shots to begin with. But like I said, once you get above, you know, into the 20s to 30s, you probably want to start putting points into other things, and you probably only want to put them in to get them there. Whereas the melee defense, you want it to be 50, 60 if you can. You know, 40s to 60s is golden, and and even higher than that, then it actually, you could start putting the guys as tanks, and they can get surrounded by enemy units. You give them a shield, and they can sit there and take hits from 6-7 units, and they may not even get killed. So keep that in mind. So that can be, these can be huge abilities for you. The damage is based on the weapons that you have equipped. The effectiveness of against armor, that's dependent on the weapons that you have. Chance to hit head is based on abilities and the equipment that you have. And then the vision is the other thing that can make or break things. With your archers, obviously, especially if you're going to give them bow mastery to increase their range even farther, you don't want them to have any headgear that's going to lower their vision, because they can only shoot as far as they can see, obviously. So you wouldn't want them to have a bunch of heavy headgear on, have minus vision, and then only be able to shoot. So let's say this can shoot 7 tiles, but my vision's 5. I can only shoot 5 tiles away, even though my bow's technically better than that. So just be very cautious with the equipment. But for these guys, you know, in melee, they can see 6, so it'll help me scout around a little bit. But it doesn't matter if they can't see very far, because they're going to be hitting guys that are 1 or 2 squares away, and these other guys will have longer vision to help me see bigger distances. So, and you can see all these different kind of traits and things here. The backgrounds give you some background story. They also affect what kind of random events happen. So every, I think, I don't know, 5 days or something, may get a random event, and depending on the background, it may have influence on what random event happens. Some will be good, some will be bad, some will be affected by other traits that are here. So it may make sense to have a more well-rounded party to see what kind of events you can trigger. Like what I'd find is my hunters would frequently get into shooting contests, which could have the potential to increase the ranged attack for the units. One of the guys would trigger something where everybody would be friendly and it would increase their happiness. I think the Sword Master and the Retired Soldier would have events where they would increase the stats of my other guys. You got to be careful with the Sword Master, because he has the chance of triggering an event where he actually gets older, and that's like a 25% debuff across all of his abilities other than Resolve. So that can like destroy a Sword Master character potentially. So just be very, very cautious with that. So again, you're hiring a guy, you're looking to see where their stars are, you're looking to see where the traits are. If there's something that's going to be breaking them, then you just discard them unless it's early on in the game, in which case you don't care if they die. Another technique that you could be using that I guess I wish I would have thought of more is once you get a full retinue, you can just have a bunch of shit guys, keep them at level 1, and you effectively just use them as pack mules. And that, because you can put on armor, weapons, accessory, helmet, 2 items here, and that'll be additional stuff that you could have in your inventory to be opened up to have more stuff to sell, and then you just have to keep unequipping them if you're going to use them to have additional spots. And typically if you're out killing guys, then like level 1, it's costing me 9 gold pieces a day to have them in reserve, and I could have all those extra slots. So that's a way you can kind of milk the game too, to get additional inventory slots, unless you're going to use a mod that increases the amount of inventory space that you have on there. So that's what I'd recommend. Okay, and now once you look at your skills and you kind of get an idea of what you want, then you got to make a decision as how are you going to end up building this guy. And kind of the way I thought about it towards the end here is I would decide, is he going to be you know, obviously if he was going to be a hunter and he had good range, that's going to make him out to be a good archer. If he had really good defensive abilities, like let's see here, where are my good tanks? I think actually unfortunately my tanks died. So here's one. So here he's got 70, 60, pretty good attack chances. So this would have been a good tank. His HP is low because I was doing a Nimble build, and I built him wrong, is effectively what that is. So you would never want to build a Nimble build like this. You'd want to have all your points put into HP and these defenses the way it was. So that's how I should have done it. He should have been an exceptional character. Unfortunately, I fucked him up. But again, this is why I'm telling you to learn from my mistakes. But this would have been a good tank build here. Had he been there. So if I would have known he was going to be a good tank, and now that I know how powerful tanks could be, I'd be like, okay, I want to have something in Colossus to increase his HP. I really liked Pathfinder. What that would do is allow you to cross more terrain and elevations of terrain with reduced fatigue and action points. I really liked having recover on units. That allowed you to reduce the fatigue by 50%, so I could get out and fight, because especially once you're doing these longer battles later on, you're going to fatigue out and you're going to need to recover fatigue as fast as possible, and if you use the recover to use up your turn, that'll allow him to get several attacks. Now if you have a really good character that you know you're going to want to use long term, I would strongly recommend that you give him students. And obviously the earlier on the better, because that will allow you to get 20% additional experience. And then once you get to be a level 11, you'll get that this skill point back, and you can select an additional ability, so it equals out. But if he doesn't survive, then you've wasted your ability. If you do have somebody that's going to be doing the Nimble build, you're probably going to want to give them dodge just for the 15%, but do not put your points into initiative, because the math doesn't work out for that to work out well. If you have a guy that's got really good rolls everywhere else, but he has low resolve, one way you can try to fix that is by spending a point on Fortified Mind. So keep that in mind. Resilient, I didn't think make much sense. Early on, if you got characters that are going to be kind of shitty and you don't have good helms, maybe doing a Steel Brow could be beneficial, but for the most part I think that's not worth it, and those points are better used elsewhere. If you're going to do the throwing guy that we had talked about, with the quick hands and the throwing weapons, you'd probably want to give them bags and belts, because the throwing weapons only have 5 ammo, and if they're going to be throwing a lot, then you can have 2 extra slots down in your inventory to have additional throwing weapons so they can throw throughout the combat. Or if you want to turn them into a decent melee guy, then you just switch them into the melee and start slamming into the enemy, but that could be a potential interesting build. I didn't use Adrenaline, I didn't find it particularly helpful. Barbarians use it all the time, so that definitely would suck, because it just lets you go quicker, but for me it didn't make a big difference. The quick hands is a really good ability, but I didn't actually take advantage of it, but in retrospect, after playing this longer, I can definitely see where it's useful. Now, Gifted is a controversial one. Most players actually use Gifted. I never did. However, how I could envision using it potentially is if I know I have a brother that I hired that's kind of crappy, that I expect is probably going to get himself killed, but I really need to have somebody there. You can put the ability into Gifted, and then you'll effectively get to roll a second roll for your ability points. So you'll level up, you'll put in your points, your attributes, then you can put Gifted. What you're going to do is do a second round of attribute points, because you would instantly get another level up, but then you just don't get a talent, and that's what these are. These are called talents, these perks here. So Backstabber I thought was quite a good ability. It gives you a plus 10% chance to hit for every guy that's around there. If you're going to have somebody that you know is going to be a tank, you're going to want to give them the Shield Expert, because this increases the defensive bonus by 25% for shields. It also reduces the damage dealt to shields by 50%, because it's really easy to break shields early on, which can be quite painful. If you're doing archers, I recommend giving you Fast Adaptation, which increases every time you miss an attack, it increases your chance to hit by 10%. I guess potentially this could be beneficial on a melee guy too, but I wasn't finding that they were missing attacks enough where I thought that was going to make a big difference. The archers, I thought giving them bullseye was good in case there's anything obstacles in front of them. It would take away 25% of that penalty. And then the Fast Adaptation I thought was really quite good for my archers. I did not think it was good for my tanks though. I just didn't feel that they had enough range defense, or really needed to have that kind of range defense, because once you give them a shield, it really makes their range defense go up high. So like this guy at 60, this is way overkill for range defense. I wasted a bunch of points and I could have used those putting it into fatigue and HP, so that was a mistake on my part. You don't really need that to be that high, whereas the melee defense, I'd be happy as high as I could get that. That's as high as I'd want it to go. Brawny is essential ability for any guy that's going to be using heavy armor because it reduces the fatigue penalty by 30%, and some of these heavy armors can cost 40 fatigue, so that is a significant amount of fatigue that you can get back, especially when you're talking about both armor and a helm, which can cost 20, and an armor that's 60. So getting 30% of that back is huge. That can make or break a character. Relentlessness, I never used it. It could potentially be good, but for most part I didn't think it was very helpful. Rotation, I think, is a critical skill early on, especially if you have brothers that you don't think are going to be able to make it. Being able to rotate to save really important characters could be essential, especially if you have fodder characters. Like, I don't care if you live or die, rotate in, get slaughtered to save somebody that's going to be more beneficial late on. So for the guys, like I have my main guys having, I think, didn't they have rotate? I guess they didn't, but a couple of these guys do have rotate, and I wish I would have had those skill points to use somewhere else, because late game I rarely used it, but early on it was an essential skill. So that's how I would think about that. Like this guy, I wish he didn't have still brow, because I would have used those points somewhere else to make him a better character, but again, I didn't quite understand how to build these guys out when I was going through it. Rally the troops. This is a critical skill, but you only want it on your banner guy. That allows you skill can rally fleeing allies and raise morale to all nearby levels of steady. The higher the resolve is on your guy, the higher the chances to succeed, and it does fail even at 145 resolve, but for your banner guy you definitely want that, and you also want to give him the fortified mine. Taunt, I guess if you put it on a tank or something it could be good, but I didn't use this ability at all. Now, critical role, as I probably should have guessed with how many years, is weapon specialization. Now, this has kind of multiple things. So if you use your skills, it reduces the fatigue buildup by 25%, and then it gives you additional bonuses depending on the situation. Some give you increased chance to hit, other ones give you increased armor damage, other ones, so like the long axe now doesn't have a penalty to your hit chance if he's right next to it, because that's what happens with range 2 weapons. If you're right next to a unit, they suffer hit penalties, so depending on the situation it can be huge. Now the thing to realize about this is everything is a skill. Your basic attack is a skill, your ability is a skill, so I didn't appreciate that. I thought, so for example, this is your basics. Cleave is your basic attack. If you use Decapitate, that can do additional stuff, or you can do Split Shield. I thought only these two things were skills. I didn't understand that even my basic attack was. So by giving them Cleaver Mastery, it reduces the fatigue by 25% for a basic attack. So once you have an idea of what weapon you want to give these guys, you definitely want to put a point into the mastery. And then for your banner guy, you're always going to want to have pull arm, because that's what your battle standard is. So that lets you to move, attack, and then move back, so you can kind of kite and keep him alive, because he's not going to have good melee defense, since you're going to be wanting to put so many points into your resolve. And then you'd also want your banner guy to have good fatigue as well, so he can keep spamming his rally ability, and a decent chance to hit, because he can do pretty good damage. 50 to 70 damage is not bad, and it's a range 2, so he can do good damage against non-heavily armored units. So again, you just got to decide what you do. I think there's a lot of hate towards bow mastery, but I really liked archers on my playthrough here. Perhaps if I would have had better characters, then I'd want to go all melee. Certainly once you get to the end game, the archers are not nearly as important when you're fighting, undead auxiliaries and really heavily armored guys. They become more of a liability, and there's certain matches that they just aren't even helpful in. You got to keep them behind. But especially early game, mid game, even into some of the end game stuff, archers were great. They were some of my most powerful units. So I certainly really liked the bow mastery. Having the increased range was definitely helpful with sniping things like necromancers and other counter archer play, counter arbalist play. I did not like crossbows themselves, but that they allow you to do armor penetration, so that would have allowed my guys to potentially be good against some of those matches that the bows were completely negated on. So perhaps I should have played around a little bit with that, but just be aware that that's how these different masteries work. Reach advantage, if you're going to have two-handed weapons and be using a lot of AoE attacks, which definitely is a great idea. If you have the fatigue to do it, then this could be very good, because if you're hitting, let's say, 3 guys, then you get plus 15 melee defense, and then if you have you know, Berserk, you get extra and you can attack again. Then you can really stack up your chances to be able to get your melee defense, so then when they attack you again, they will do less damage. So that could be a huge ability. I didn't take advantage of it because I didn't really have enough fatigue on most of my guys to be able to take advantage of that. So definitely something to take into consideration. Now, yeah, so I guess that's what I'd have to say about that. Potentially putting this on this cleaver guy where you'd attack twice, kill a unit, and attack a third time, that would have been 15 melee defense. That actually could have probably been a real good ability. You know, definitely way better than this rotation, but again, I didn't understand how that worked. So, Overwhelm is a very good ability. I put it on all my archers because they were attacking pretty regularly 2 or 3 times. 2 or 3 times a turn, and each time that what happens is you attack once, and then everybody that attacks afterwards stacks an overwhelm, which lowers both the melee skill and the range skill by the opponent by 10% for 1 turn. So you can really debuff, you know, enemy heroes, Lindworms, other units that typically have a lot of defense, and other dangerous opponents quite significantly with that. The other one that could potentially, I didn't build this, but there are daggers that do a lot of damage, and having the dagger mastery allows you to get an additional attack with it. So, you know, putting that on an overwhelm on a dagger guy where you're just attack, that could be very, very good. Lone Wolf was an ability that I didn't appreciate because I didn't really have characters that could have taken taken advantage of this ability until the very end of the game. But if you're going to do one of those big tank builds, you're going to want to have Lone Wolf on it, because like I said, you got great defenses and the fatigue to spam shield wall, and then you have the shield expert on there. Like this guy here, you know, 60-70, I could put him in the middle of a bunch of guys, and you know, for 3 or 4 turns he could tank and attack by 5 or 6 guys now, because he doesn't have the HP. He couldn't survive that very long. But my other tank, especially if you watch when I did the Monolith, he was tanking, you know, 12 guys and a hero for 10-15 turns before he died. And the only reason he died is because he started to have his morale break because his resolve wasn't high enough, and his shield broke, and he didn't have the fatigue to be able to keep spamming things, so I had to keep alternating recover on him. If I would have built him better, then that wouldn't have happened. But again, I didn't understand how to build these guys appropriately. Underdog, I really did like this ability, especially if you're going to put one of those tanks where they're going to get surrounded. What it does is negates the backstabber perk and the other benefits that happen if you're fighting opponents that have that. So definitely a critical skill that can pay huge dividends if you're fighting the right kind of opponent. 9 lives could be good. What it does is if you suffer a fatal attack, you have 1 HP, so it's really annoying when you fight like Necrosavants or other enemy heroes that have it, but usually you're overwhelmed by the opponents, or you're bleeding, or you're poisoned. So for me, it just didn't make sense because you're going to suffer that extra attack, so it didn't make or break anything for me. But it could be a use, but I ignored that for the most part. In Crippling Strikes, I ignored this ability too, because I just didn't find that I was causing injuries enough. Now you could say, well, if I would have had Crippling Strike, then I would have had a 33% chance to increase more injuries, but I just didn't find that it was happening regularly. Likewise, because I wasn't doing enough critical injuries, I made no sense to put points into Executioner. Let's see, continuing on here, footwork. I thought that was a really nice skill to put on my archers because it would get them out of danger quite regularly. So for them, I think it's critical to put that on an archer. However, if you have much more better situational awareness and you're making sure they're not getting into combat, you can save that point and put it into something else. So I think expert players probably think this is a wasted point, but for me, I thought that made a lot of sense. Potentially it could be useful on your banner guy too, because if he gets your enemy AI is going to come after him regularly because of his low defenses. But it definitely, I didn't find that I had to put it on by any means. I guess the banner is the one time where you may want to put a little more into range defense, because the archers will frequently try to snipe him out because he may have weaker armor on, so having a little extra on him makes sense. But that's what I'd recommend there. Berserk, probably one of the best abilities in the game, but it's only to be used on guys that have the fatigue to be able to take it, because otherwise you're just wasting too much fatigue and they end up gassing out and not taking advantage of this. I put it on all my guys because I'm like, oh my god, I got all this extra bonus AP and I can do all these great things, and sometimes I can kill a guy and then use recover, and sometimes I can attack and then move and then attack again, or I can, you know, attack 3 times instead of 2 times and, you know, do all this stuff. Or with my very powerful damage dealers, I can kill potentially 2 guys per turn, but without enough fatigue, it's just going to make you gas out too quick, and it's actually going to probably net harm you. So again, if you have guys that have the fatigue to tolerate it, it's the best ability that you can possibly get. But if you don't, it probably makes sense to not take it. For example, if you have a guy that rolled well, but you know is going to have bad fatigue, tank him out, put him in heavy armor, get him battle forged, and then just give him a 2-handed weapon like a 2-handed mace, have 1 attack per turn, then you'll have enough fatigue recovery to do that. But if you end up stacking up additional attacks, you're just going to gas them out, and it's going to bite you in the ass in the long run. Likewise, unless you have a guy that you're specifically building to go after people's heads, I don't think that makes a lot of sense. Because some of the helmets, especially late game, have, you know, 200 armor compared to the armor, which has 200 to 300, and you're much more likely to hit the armor on the body than you are to hit the head. So unless you're stacking things up where you know you're going to be getting through the headgear pretty regularly, I didn't think it made a lot of sense to invest in this. Now, the benefit of it theoretically is once you take out the head armor and you keep hitting the head regularly, it gives you bonus damage to the HP, so it'll allow you to kill guys easier. But again, it's theoretical. You're going to be hitting bodies much more, so I didn't find that to be a useful. Nimble, this can be huge for you. This is probably the alternative, because you have to decide on your units. Are you going to build a battle forge guy, which is the heavy armor specialization, or are you going to do a nimble build? So the nimble build you'd want to do if you're going to be putting if they roll pretty high with their initiative, and they have good defenses, then you can turn them into a nimble tank, which can be fantastic. They wear light armor, so what that does is by having light armor totally below 15, it gives you a 60% reduction to any damage that would get through your armor and go towards the HP. So if you have large HP pools, you're effectively taking damage at only 40%. And if you end up giving them really good defenses with a shield, then the chances of them getting hit is even lower, or you can just turn them into a Battle Forge one, which makes it even less, and then you just want to make sure you have everything put into defense and fatigue to be able to keep spanning shield wall, which ends up granting an additional 32 melee defense for 1 turn and 18 range defense, and you get an additional 5% for each, or extra 5 I should say, for each guy that's in shield wall next to him. So these guys can get crazy stats, and that's how they end up tanking so well. But if you're going to play around with Nimble, like I said, that's what you can do. I guess potentially you could put Nimble on your archers too, but I didn't find that to be necessary. I just gave them medium tier armor or really good light armor, and that was more than sufficient. Early on in the game, my archers would get shot occasionally, but once you start to get them ranged defenses into the 30s range, they're rarely getting attacked. I mean, this guy would get shot by people would shoot at him, and they would almost never land attacks. Same here. So while your front line probably caps out after 20s, 30s, you know, probably want to get a little bit higher on the archers, because once these guys start running, the other archers will try to counter snipe them. But at that kind of rate, they almost never get hit. So That's what I'd recommend there. Battle Forged, if you're going to make your heavy tank guys, your heavy frontliners, they're all going to want to have Battle Forged if they have the fatigue for it. What that ends up doing is armor damage is reduced by a percentage equal to 5% of the current armor value. So, you know, for this it wouldn't be very good, but if you have armor that has 417, you know, 5% of 417 reducing the damage that's dealt is pretty significant, especially when you throw a shield and everything on top of there. So that's how you really get bonuses, and it's your total armor. So it's like, okay, this is 417, but you know, this headgear here is 336. So now all of a sudden you're you know, 750 for your defenses there. So 5% is a significant amount. The next trait is Fearsome. What this does is that if you do damage, it ends up causing resolve penalties, and it'll cause units to flee. This was a really good ability early on in the game. By the end of the game, I was hating that I was causing so many morale checks, because I wanted to kill guys, because I wanted to get their equipment, I wanted to get their famed weapons, I wanted to you know, get the experience. So in the long run, because I had all my guys equipped with Fearsome just about, especially when I was fighting goblins and things like that, I was causing all sorts of fear checks. Like I said, early on in the game when your guys are weak, it's good, but if you have guys that you know you're going to be keeping to late game, I wouldn't waste the trait point on this, because you can get better things put on them. So and I think there's some controversy. I'm a little confused. When I was looking on some of the forums after I beat the game, just kind of reading to see what other people's thoughts were, a lot of people have different ways that they were saying, like, this almost never gets triggered. I would frequently see it get triggered, so I don't know if over updates in the game that this got fixed or more balanced, but it did get triggered quite a bit, especially with my archers when they were doing a ton of damage. I didn't find it was getting regularly triggered by my melee guys, though, so again, I think it's probably not a good investment of your points unless you're doing it early on. But again, you're probably not going to be, because each one of these is like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So it's like at least level 7 before you're unlocking that. So probably best to skip it, even though most of my guys have it. The next ability is Duelist. Now this is something that I think I would, in retrospect, I could have done a lot more with. What it effectively does is if you have a single-handed weapon and then you have a throwing weapon in the other hand, like a net, then you get plus 25% damage. So that could have been a huge damage output, and it's just a straight 25% damage buff. So, you know, most of my guys are all using two-handed weapons, but if you had somebody that was a single-handed weapon and you wanted to use it and you had a really good one, that could have been something to keep in mind. Again, I didn't really play along with a lot of throwing stuff, so it didn't make a big difference for me. Unfortunately, shields don't count for that, but you know, I think the fencer weapon or some of the swords, if you wanted to use them, that could potentially be a good option. Another really good ability that I didn't utilize as much as I should is Killing Frenzy, especially on my archers where they're doing all this damage and regularly killing weaker tier guys. I could have just got an additional 25% damage on all their attacks, and you stack it with Berserk and they can just do a ton of damage, because if you kill a unit, it increases all damage by 25% for 2 turns. Now it doesn't stack for every kill that you get, but it just keeps resetting the timer for the 2 turns every time they kill somebody else, so that can significantly increase your damage output. So it's good on the archers. It would be really good on the two-handed weapon guys that do a lot of damage. So definitely an ability that would be great. And then Indomitable is another ability that could be very, very good, and I did not utilize appropriately. What it can do is you can put it on your tanks. If they have a lot of fatigue, then you can do, you know, Shield Wall and Indomitable, but it reduces it gives you pretty much a 50% damage reduction, and it gives you immunity from getting stunned, knocked back, or grabbed for 1 turn. So that could be huge when you're sitting there fighting really powerful opponents, or orcs or ungles, other things that plow through your line, or if you're having them tank a bunch of lindworms or other units that they're just taking a bunch of hits, that will help you stay alive for a much longer time frame. So now that we've kind of gone through kind of the perks, the attributes, and then the builds, what I recommend for different kind of builds is if you're going to do a two-hander build, I would do Colossus, Pathfinder, Recovery, Student if he's a good one, Brawny, some sort of weapon specialization. I would do Underdog, Battle Forged. If he has Fatigued, I would give him Berserk. And then if he's going to be one that does a lot of AoE stuff, I'd probably end up giving him Reach Advantage. If not, I would give him Killing Frenzy, or I give him Killing Frenzy no matter what. So that's kind of how I build those guys out. And then you could plus or minus if somebody was, poor resolve, then you could give them Fortified Mind potentially. But that's kind of how I'd build out a good two-hander. Like I said, the throwing weapon guy, I would have him have quick hands and throwing weapons. I would not have Berserk most likely. I wouldn't do Fearsome, so that's how I'd have those two out. And I would then have him use, instead of this ability here, I'd have him have Bags and Belts, and then he could just throw a lot more. Or if you're going to alternate between the melee and that, but assuming you're going to just have a pure throwing guy, that's how I would build the throwing guy out. But if you're, alternatively, the other option is instead of Bags and Belt, if you want to have him use a two-handed weapon or something like that when they close in, then you just switch into that and attack, and then you just have a bunch of stuff into the melee attack. So that's how I'd recommend that. If you're going to do a Nimble tank build, I really liked how I built this guy out. Unfortunately, I fucked up his ability points, but I thought working with Classiest, Pathfinder, Recover, Student, Dodge, if he had good initiative, which most of your Nimble builds will by default because they have light armor, will do that. Potentially Fortified Mind could be good if they have a low resolve. Shield Expert is an essential because you need them to be able to get as their defense is as high as possible because they can't take a hit. Backstabber was probably unnecessary. Lone Wolf, if you're going to send them out on by themselves to just tank, which I think is the best way to use a tank. Having Underdog to make sure you can lower the hit chances more. And what else would I do? You could potentially get a little more advantage with Brawny, but I think it's probably unnecessary. And then giving them some sort of weapon specialization if they're going to be attacks, or if they're going to just be pure tanks, then possibly Indomitable once they start getting through the armor to help keep their survivability more, would be how I would try to build those guys out. My archers, I was very pleased with how they worked. I gave them this. Yeah, this is the one that I would have used. I really liked giving the fast adaptation for the increased chance to hit, the Pathfinder, the Recover, because they'll be shooting so much unless they have super high fatigue, in which case you may not need it, but for the most part the archers get so many attacks that they will gas out. Students, Bullseye to bypass the range penalties, Anticipation for the range defenses, Bow Mastery, assuming you're using a bow. I did like the footwork. I liked giving them Overwhelm. I really liked giving them Berserk and Killing Frenzy to increase the damage. So I thought this was a really good build, and I was very, very pleased with how these guys performed for me. As long as they had guys that didn't have super heavy armor, these guys could just liquefy anybody. You know, Brigands, Goblins, Nomads. They weren't good against anybody that was super... I mean, they were even pretty good against Orcs too, because you could really snipe them down. But, you know, Ancient Dead, they really struggled with. Zombies they were really good at. They were good at killing fallen heroes. Lindworms. I mean, there's a lot of guys. Pretty much just the super heavy armored Orcs or super heavy armored Undead were the ones that they're so-so against... what are they called? Oh my gosh. Barbarians. So I was just very, very pleased with them. If you're going to do just a two-handed weapon guy, you know, kind of the same build, but like a reach of 2, then you'd probably want to skip the Berserk if they don't have the fatigue for it and just do more with damage, but that's up to you. It depends on what kind of skill points you have. And then the banner guys, which are kind of their whole unit amongst themselves. Like I said, you're going to be putting as much as you can into resolve, a little bit into range defense. You want to have a bunch more into fatigue. So in retrospect, I wish I would have had more into fatigue. but for their abilities, I liked giving them Colossus in case they did get attacked, Pathfinder to move around, Recover, Student, Fortified Mind, obviously, because that's just a straight buff to their abilities here. Brawny, if you're going to give them heavy armor. Rally to help increase their survivability. Polearm Mastery. Underdog was quite helpful. Berserk, early on, the Bannerman will do good damage and you'll get a lot of use out of Berserk, but as you start fighting more elite guys, I rarely found that the Berserk was helpful, so I probably would have used those points somewhere else. I really liked making a heavily armored Battleforged Bannerman because what the AI will do is frequently try to go after the guys that have the lowest numbers, and that's probably going to be one of your Bannermen. So by giving them a bunch of armor, that when they get hit, that'll help protect them. And then a lot of the time, your guys will be in front of the Bannermen because you'll be in the second or third row, so they'll be getting reduced chances to hit by attacking there. So that worked out really, really well for them. So perhaps giving them like Indomitable in case they got attacked, or if you are going to just kind of attack from range, giving them Killing Frenzy. Those are all good options to utilize there. Perhaps another thing that could have been really good on a Bannerman is giving them Adrenaline. This could be a guy that I could see that being very helpful. For example, if all your guys are starting to run away or being broken, use Adrenaline, make sure this guy goes first, and then be able to spam the Rally the Troops ability to stop your guys from running and getting them a bunch of attacks of opportunity and losing your turn by having that happen. So that's kind of how I'd recommend building these guys out. So I hope that was helpful. I'll probably have a third episode that'll be a little bit shorter, just discussing the specifics of items, since that's kind of has its own little area here. But I hope this is helpful for you. Thanks for watching. If you're enjoying these videos, please give my channel a like and subscribe to encourage me to post more content for you. Have a great day.